Have you ever said something to your partner, maybe in a heated moment, maybe just trying to sound strong and independent, and suddenly everything shifted? The life drained out of the room. They went quiet, withdrew, and pulled away. You were left sitting there, confused, thinking, what just happened? Why did my words land like a grenade? If your partner has an avoidant attachment style, this reaction is more than just sensitivity. The wrong words don't just sting, they echo. They ripple through their nervous system like thunder rolling across a stormy sky. What feels like a casual statement to you can strike the deepest part of their fears. Fears of intimacy, fears of rejection, fears of being fundamentally unlovable. And here's the thing, this isn't about being too sensitive. For the avoidant, it's about survival. Many avoidants learned very early in childhood that closeness was dangerous. Love could vanish overnight. Needing too much might drive people away. So they built walls, careful, calculated walls, to keep their hearts safe. Now let me pause and expand on this with a real-world picture. Imagine a child reaching for a parent who constantly shifts between affection and withdrawal. One day, the hug is welcomed. The next day, it's rejected. That child learns, if I reach too hard, I'll get hurt. If I show too much, I'll be left. Fast forward into adulthood, and that same blueprint runs silently in the background of their relationships. So when you say something that triggers those fears, you're not just talking to your partner in 2025. You're talking to their inner child who once felt abandoned. That's why the fallout feels so big, so dramatic, so confusing. To you, it's a comment. To them, it's confirmation that the walls they built are still necessary. But here's the hope. Avoidant partners are not broken. They're not incapable of love. They're human. Human with defenses shaped by pain. And when you learn to speak a language their heart can actually hear, everything changes. You stop pressing against their walls, and you start inviting them to lower them. In this video, we're going to walk through the 4 most damaging phrases you can say to an avoidant partner. I'll explain why these words feel like emotional landmines, and then, most importantly, I'll give you the alternatives. Words that build connection instead of fear. Phrases that create safety, trust, and intimacy. Because let's be honest, love isn't about fixing someone. It's about understanding their wiring and learning how to connect in a way that feels safe to both of you. And once you know this language, you'll see avoidant partners can love deeply. They just need to know love doesn't come with a catch. Let's dive into the first phrase you should never say to a partner with an avoidant attachment style: I can't stand your friends. Or, why do you even hang out with them? They're shallow, immature, bad for you. Now I get it. Maybe you look at your partner's social circle and you see people who don't seem trustworthy or who feel like distractions. Maybe you feel like these friends are pulling your partner away from deeper intimacy with you. And the urge to call it out, to say you deserve better people in your life, feels almost irresistible. But here's the truth. For an avoidant, their friends aren't just friends. They're part of a carefully built emotional survival system. These friendships often represent safety because they don't demand much. They're light, easygoing, surface level. To you, it might look like wasted time. To your avoidant partner, it's sanctuary. It's where they don't feel pressured to reveal their deepest selves. Here's an analogy. Imagine their emotional world like a castle surrounded by thick walls. You're the one person trying to enter the inner courtyard. But their friends? Their friends live outside the castle gates, around the campfire. It's safe out there, no risks, no heavy demands. When you criticize those people, it doesn't just feel like an attack on the campfire crew. It feels like you're trying to knock down the whole castle. And ironically, the more you attack their friends, the more they retreat into those very relationships. Why? because their nervous system says, my partner judges me. My friends don't. With my friends, I feel accepted. With my partner, I feel pressure. Now let's zoom out. Have you noticed how criticism often backfires in any relationship? Think about a teenager whose parents criticize their friends. What happens? The teenager clings even harder to those friendships. It's not about the friends. It's about defending their autonomy. Avoidants operate the same way. So what can you do instead? Flip the script. Replace criticism with curiosity. Instead of saying, why do you hang out with them? They're so shallow. Try, I can see your friends are really important to you. I'd love to understand what you value most about those relationships. See the shift. One sounds like judgment. The other sounds like genuine interest. When you approach their world with curiosity instead of condemnation, you build trust. You show them, I'm not here to tear down your safe spaces. I'm here to understand you, and that creates safety. And here's a subtle but powerful effect. When avoidants feel safe, when they don't feel attacked, they naturally let you closer. Over time, you'll often become the one person who knows them more deeply than anyone else. Not because you demanded it, but because you created the trust that made it possible. So the rule is simple. Never attack or criticize their friends. To you, it might feel like honesty. To them, it feels like ripping away the scaffolding holding up their emotional world. Instead, choose curiosity, choose compassion, choose safety. That's how you stop being the threat and start being the person they trust. Have you ever said something like, I can handle this on my own, or I don't need anybody? On the surface, it sounds strong and independent. After all, we live in a culture that celebrates self-sufficiency. Nobody wants to seem needy or clingy. But to a partner with an avoidant attachment style, those words don't land as strength. They land as abandonment. Here's why. In the mind of an avoidant, need equals safety. Their earliest experiences often taught them that people stayed when they were useful, when they filled a role, when they served a purpose. Their worth was tied to whether they were needed. So when you say, I don't need you, what they actually hear is, you're replaceable. You don't matter. Sooner or later, I'll leave. Think of it like this. Imagine someone walking across a tightrope. The only reason they dared to step out is because there's a safety net below. When you declare you don't need them, it's like shouting up, by the way, the safety net isn't necessary anymore. Suddenly, every step feels terrifying. That's exactly how your words hit an avoidant's heart. Let me give you a real-life example. I once spoke with someone who told me her avoidant partner pulled away after she proudly announced, I don't rely on anyone. I'm fine on my own. She meant it as reassurance. Don't worry, I won't smother you. But he heard it as, you're not essential to my life. You could disappear tomorrow, and it wouldn't matter. The unintended message was rejection. So what's the alternative? Replace need with choice. Instead of saying, I don't need you, try, I want you. Instead of, I can do this without you, try, I choose to do this with you. Do you feel the difference? One says, you're unnecessary. The other says, you're valued. You're chosen. Avoidance may struggle with the concept of being needed because it can feel like pressure. But being wanted, that feels like freedom. It says, I'm here not because I have to be, but because I choose to be. And here's the beautiful paradox. When avoidants feel chosen rather than needed, they often become more open, more willing to risk closeness. Why? Because choice feels safe. It tells them, I matter not because I fill a role, but because of who I am. So here's the takeaway. Never declare that you don't need your avoidant partner. That phrase plants fear. Instead, Let your words communicate desire, choice, and appreciation. That's what makes them step toward you on that tightrope, instead of retreating back to the safety of the platform. One of the quickest ways to make an avoidant shut down completely is to bring up the word incompatible. Why? Because to an avoidant, that single word doesn't just describe a problem in the relationship. It sounds like the end of the story. Think about it. Avoidants already carry a deep fear that intimacy won't last. They often expect relationships to eventually fall apart. So when you say, maybe we're just incompatible, you're confirming their worst fear. You're handing them a ready-made exit sign, and because they already lean toward withdrawal, they'll often take it. Let's make this more concrete with a story. I once heard about a couple where the anxious partner, frustrated after another fight, told her avoidant boyfriend, "We're just too different." "Will never work," she didn't mean it literally. She was hoping it would spark him to fight for her. But instead, he grew colder. He stopped calling, stopped checking in, and within weeks, he ended things. Not because the incompatibility was real, but because the label itself gave him permission to give up. Here's the key. The language we use in moments of conflict either builds a bridge or burns it down. When you use the word incompatible, you're essentially saying, this can't be fixed. For an avoidant who is already conflict averse, that feels like finality. So what can you do instead? Instead of calling out incompatibility, call out differences with curiosity. Don't say, we're incompatible. Try, we see this differently. I want to understand how you see it. Or instead of, we'll never work because of how different we are. Try, our differences challenge me sometimes, but I think they can also teach me something. See the difference? One shuts the door, the other keeps it open, even when things feel tense. Here's an analogy. Imagine a gardener who plants two different types of flowers side by side. One needs more sunlight, and the other needs more shade. If the gardener declares, these flowers are incompatible, she might rip one out of the soil. But if she says, they need different conditions, but maybe I can adjust the environment so both can thrive, she gives both flowers a chance to flourish together. Relationships with avoidance are a lot like that. They require patience, adjustment, and language that invites growth, not endings. So here's the truth. When you label a relationship as incompatible, avoidants don't hear, let's work this out. They hear, it's already over. And once that seed is planted, it's very hard to uproot. If you care about the connection, remove incompatibility from your vocabulary and replace it with curiosity, openness, and a willingness to explore the middle ground. Calling an avoidant selfish might feel tempting when you're hurting, but it almost always backfires. The moment you use that word, they don't hear your pain. They hear an attack. And avoidants are masters at defending themselves against attacks by shutting down, withdrawing, or flipping the blame back onto you. Here's the problem. To an avoidant, being called selfish confirms the narrative they secretly fear, that closeness makes them the bad guy. Many avoidants grew up in environments where needing space was criticized, where their independence was misunderstood. So, when you say, you're selfish, it pushes on an old wound. Instead of sparking reflection, it sparks defensiveness. Imagine this. A woman is dating a dismissive avoidant man. She plans a weekend getaway, and he cancels last minute, saying he needs time to himself. Feeling hurt, she blurts out, "You're so selfish. You never think of me." In her mind, she's expressing truth. But in his mind, her words sound like judgment, like a trap. So he withdraws even more, spending days in silence. The relationship tension doubles. The truth is, avoidants often aren't intentionally selfish. They're self-protective. They manage relationships through distance, not because they don't care, but because closeness feels overwhelming. Labeling them selfish only reinforces their fear that relationships mean losing their sense of safety. So what's the alternative? Instead of labeling, describe how you feel. Don't say, "You're selfish." Try, "When you cancel plans, I feel unimportant." Or, "You only think about yourself." Try, "I'd love if we could plan something together and both commit to it." Notice the shift. One attacks their character, the other expresses your need. And when you express needs instead of accusations, you give the avoidant a chance to respond without shame. Here's a metaphor. Think of avoidants like turtles. When they feel attacked, they retreat into their shell, impossible to reach. If you tap harder, shouting, "Come out, you're selfish," they'll stay hidden even longer. But if you sit quietly nearby, maybe even offer food, the turtle eventually pokes its head out. Avoidants are the same. They open up when they don't feel judged. The takeaway is this: avoidants already wrestle with guilt about closeness. Calling them selfish locks them in that guilt and drives them further away. But when you shift from blame to vulnerability, from "you're selfish" to "I feel unseen," you invite connection rather than push it away. This is one of the most common phrases people end up saying when they're with an avoidant partner. You see them pulling back, keeping everything bottled up, refusing to share what's really on their mind. You get frustrated, you feel disconnected, and suddenly it slips out. "Why can't you just open up?" To you, it feels like a plea for closeness. But to them, it lands as a judgment. What they hear is, "You're failing me. You're broken. You're not enough." And instead of cracking open, they shut down even harder. Think of it like this. Avoidants are like a locked room with multiple layers of protection. Every time you shake the door, demanding it to open, they don't suddenly unlock it for you. They add another lock. They reinforce the barriers. So, what should you do instead? Shift from pressure to invitation. "You never tell me anything. I really enjoy it when you share even little things from your day. It makes me feel closer to you." One pushes, the other welcomes. One adds fear, the other creates safety. Here's the paradox. Avoidants don't open up when you demand it. They open up when they realize they don't have to. Freedom and choice, not force, are what lower their defenses. A quick story. A friend of mine dated an avoidant man. Early on, she would constantly ask him, "Why don't you talk to me about how you feel?" And every time he'd retreat further. Then she stopped asking. Instead, she'd share something light about her day and simply let the silence be comfortable. Weeks later, he started talking, at first about work, then about childhood memories. It didn't happen because she demanded openness, but because she made it safe for him to step out at his own pace. The truth is simple. Saying, "Why can't you open up?" slams the door tighter. Creating safety and showing patience quietly leaves the key on the table. And sooner or later, if they trust you, they'll use it. This one stings deeply. When you tell an avoidant partner, "You're too cold" or "you don't care," it doesn't motivate them to warm up. It confirms their biggest fear: no matter what I do, I'll never be enough. Avoidants already carry a hidden shame about not being emotional enough. Many grew up in environments where expressing feelings was unsafe or even punished. So, they learn to survive by shutting down, by putting on armor. When you call them cold, you're not just naming a behavior, you're poking at a wound that's been there since childhood. Think of it like telling someone with frostbite, "Why aren't you running faster?" Their slowness isn't laziness, it's survival. The coldness you see is not a lack of love, it's a defense against pain. So what do you do instead? Separate the person from the behavior. "You're cold." Checkmark. Sometimes I miss feeling close to you. I really value those moments when we connect. One feels like an attack. The other feels like an invitation. Here's a real example. A client once told me her avoidant husband never showed affection. Out of frustration, she said, "You act like a robot." He shut down for days. Later, she tried a new approach. "I love when you hug me before bed. It makes me feel safe." Slowly, he started initiating those small gestures more often. Why? Because she focused on what she valued instead of labeling what he lacked. Here's the key. Avoidants aren't cold because they don't care. They're cold because caring has cost them before. When you replace criticism with appreciation, you don't melt the ice by force. You let the sun do the work. We've now walked through the hidden traps of language with an avoidant partner. The phrases that don't just bruise, but reinforce the very walls they built to survive. We've seen how criticizing their friends cuts into their sense of safety, how declaring "I don't need you" feels like abandonment, how labeling the relationship as incompatible plants the seed of doom, how waiting for them to change turns love into a condition, and how calling them cold confirms their deepest shame. But here's the real takeaway. Avoidants are not heartless. They are not incapable of love. They are not broken. They are human beings who learned, often too early, that closeness can wound, that love can vanish, that depending on others can mean devastation. Every wall they build is not a sign of indifference. It's a scar. And this is where your power lies. Not in breaking down those walls with force, not in demanding that they become someone else overnight, but in becoming the person who makes safety stronger than fear. The person who knows that words aren't just sounds, they are seeds. And when you plant the right ones, acceptance, choice, compassion, you shift the soil in which love grows. Imagine their heart like a night-blooming flower. It does not open under the glare of harsh judgment. It doesn't respond to pressure or demands, but under the steady glow of consistency, under the quiet warmth of acceptance, those petals begin to unfold. Slowly, tentatively, and then beautifully. The real power moment is this. You don't need perfect words. You don't need to walk on eggshells. You just need to choose words that invite instead of accuse. Words that create bridges instead of walls. Because when safety is present, everything changes. So the next time you're tempted to lash out, to criticize, to demand, pause. Remember, your words are either bricks or keys. Bricks that fortify their fear, or keys that open the door to trust. Choose carefully, because the language of love isn't about eloquence, it's about safety. And when safety becomes the foundation, the avoidant partner who once ran from intimacy may surprise you. They may step closer. They may let you in. And in that moment, you'll see it. The walls aren't permanent. They're waiting for the right conditions to come down. And that's the paradox of love. It doesn't grow when you force it. It grows when you create the space where someone finally feels safe enough to bloom.